Namaskar, very good afternoon and warm welcome to all the learners. Today, as you know, we have been talking about bilingual education. I, Dr. Renu Tomar, welcome you to part 4 of bilingual education of this series. Friends, just to recall the last points which I covered in my last lecture, we were talking about characteristics which are important as far as good bilingual education program is concerned, because bilingual education has to be designed for linguistically, culturally and developmentally appropriate for the students, and it should be having the characteristics which we have already covered in my last lecture, that is the third lecture, were that the students will have to adhere to or cater to the high expectations as far as bilingual education is concerned, and there will be more goals to be catered to as far as the bilingual students are concerned. Another characteristics which we discussed in my previous lecture was that the curriculum has to be comparable to the material covered in the other language. In Indian context, we can say English or Hindi. The third characteristics which we covered in detail was that how instructions have to be given. Instructions have to be given particularly for the students who are taking a bilingual education, so that can be advantage to them as to cater to the difficulty level of the curriculum. So, instructions have to be through the native language for subject matter. Another characteristic which we have discussed is that the English language development. Here we replace the word English language with the Mandarin language, Spanish language or the French language development. How that component has to be taken care of as far as bilingual education is concerned or bilingualism is concerned. Friends, another characteristic is that the multicultural instructions have to be there, and it should be such that they recognize as well as incorporates the students' home culture. Friends, to understand this particular characteristic, we have to understand. Let me go back to the example which I gave in my second lecture. If we are teaching English to the student and we are trying to deal with some poem of say Coleridge, then the students has to understand that the feelings which is being shared by the poet, student will also have to understand England of those times when it was written or versed by Coleridge. For that, we will have to introduce culture of that particular country. Similarly, if we are teaching some subject matter in English, then naturally that subject matter has to be understood by the students only if they have that in their home cultures. Otherwise, we cannot expect student who is not even being addressed in or being spoken to in English at home or by peer, we cannot expect that student to understand difficult English in class. So, it is very much important that we give multicultural instructions. We give instruction in the native language also, as well as in the language which we are trying to introduce, may it be English or may it be some other language. Another important aspect which is to be covered as characteristic of bilingual education is concerned is that the instructional or the community support, the administrative staff or the instructional staff will be teachers only, or the community support, that has to address this particular problem of bilingual education. Because friends, we need to understand that any language cannot be taught or understood or learned in vacuum. That no language can be learned by the child in 30 minutes or 40 minutes of the lecture. The language can only be understood if it has got support outside the four walls of the classroom also. So, to strengthen understanding of the language, to strengthen understanding of the subject in which that language is being used as a tool to teach, we need to promote that language outside the class. We need that students' understanding is enhanced as far as that language learning is concerned. So, that language has to be supported not just only in the class, but also within the peer group, also by the administrative staff, by the community, by the home. So, if the student has the complete support, only then we can expect certain positive outcomes of those learning objectives. Another important characteristic which we need to understand is that the bilingual education, if it is being introduced by appropriately trained teachers, only then it will be effective. If a teacher who is speaking or just reading some English poem or English some prose or some play, then the teacher, the concerned teacher who is reading that, he or she does not have the understanding, the cultural understanding or the language understanding or the linguistic understanding or the syntax point of view of understanding. If the teacher lacks that, then the teacher herself will not be comfortable in teaching that particular material in the language in which he or she is not well versed. So, it is very much important that we provide appropriate training to those personnel. So, friends, when we are talking about bilingual education, let us try to understand that bilingual education does not mean that we are teaching Bengali to Hindi speaking or we are teaching Bengali to Hindi speaking or English speaking student. It also means that we are teaching to Bangla speaking student English or Hindi. It's both the way. So, we have to understand that whenever we talk about bilingual education, in that no language is to be seen as superior or inferior. The language has to be seen simply as a tool of communication. It has to be seen as an added advantage to the student. It has to be understood as a tool of culture. So, in those forms only the language has to be seen. So, friends, this is an important point which you have to understand. Bilingual education does not mean that we are teaching Hindi or English to Malayalam speaking student. It also means that we are teaching Malayalam to Hindi speaking student or Hindi speaking personnel. So, they also may need bilingual education as to perform well. All of us know that whenever for the government personnels, particularly the officers who are to be posted centrally, they may be posted. The person who belongs to Uttar Pradesh, there are huge chances he or she may have to go and work in Mizoram or Manipur. So, he or she would be required to learn that native language. Otherwise, the person will not be able to work. I wouldn't say effectively, I would say he wouldn't be able to work at all, because if a person is not able to speak the language which is being spoken by those natives, then naturally the person cannot relate to the people for whom he is working or with whom he is working. So, it is the first need of the people who may be transferred from one corner of the country to another corner of the country. So, friends, bilingual education has to be understood in these terms. Another important characteristics which we need to understand whenever we talk about bilingual education is that we need linguistically resources. We have to provide adequate resources, and what are the resources? The resources will be from the point of view of linguistics, from the point of view of cultural, as well as language development area. So, appropriate materials should be available to the students who want to go for bilingual education. Another important characteristic whenever we talk about promoting bilingual education is that parental and family involvement should be there. It is very much important that Parents and the family are importantly involved. If they are involved in the learning process, only then we can expect that bilingual education will be successful. Another important aspect which we need to understand whenever we talk about bilingual education, and it is very much correlated to the first characteristic which we covered initially in the last lecture, that the bilingual education will be of the higher level learning because it involves learning another language also. It will require frequent and appropriate monitoring of student performance, because if it does not have the monitoring of the student performance, we cannot expect the student to learn the language which is not spoken usually in the environment in which he is living or staying. There are numerous advantages to the bilingualism. As we have discussed few, let us try to recap as well as understand few more. What are the advantages to bilingualism? Bilingualism generally is seen to improve the skills. Number one, this is the skill which we talked about previously also, verbal and linguistic abilities. Friends, it is generally seen that the people who are well versed with 2, 3 or 4 languages, they have better linguistic skills, they have better verbal skills, and they are more comfortable socially. So, this is one of an advantage of bilingualism. Another important advantage is that bilingual students are generally seen to be reasoning well. Why are they reasoning well? Because learning a language means the cognitive development is going to the higher level. It also means that the affective domain is also improved, because 2 important domains psychologically are being worked upon in learning a language, that is cognitive and affective domain. Naturally, the reasoning of the student will be improving. Another important advantage of bilingual education is that the concept formation is easy. Why concept formation is easy? Because any language brings along its culture with it, and when we talk about culture, it encompasses history, it encompasses science, which is naturally linked with every culture. And because every culture is providing some kind of knowledge and information which is new to the person, he or she can easily apply that in life. He or she can easily apply in working. So, that results in concept formation also being strengthened. Another advantage of bilingualism is divergent thinking. Friends, what is divergent thinking? Divergent thinking means that from one point the person, the child or the student or the learner is able to think divergently. Divergently means from one point the person would be able to correlate art with that, person would be able to correlate culture with that, the person would be correlating aesthetic sense with that, the person will also be correlating historical facts with that, the person would also be able to correlate geographical concept with that. So, bilingualism or bilingual education always results in divergent thinking as far as students are concerned. Another important apart from the skills which we have talked about is the metalinguistic skill. Friends, metalinguistic skill, as the word itself signifies, it is ability to analyze and talk about the language as well as control language processing. The person who is bilingual would be able to analyze as well as talk about many languages. The person would be able to understand the language as well as control the language processing, because language along with it, I have repeated it again and again, and I am again repeating it for your better understanding, that when we talk about language, language brings, apart from the culture, the aesthetic sense, the science and the history, it also brings the syntax, it also brings the linguistic ability, it also brings the pronunciation with it. So, language processing is something, metalinguistic person would be able to do in a better manner. So, these are the abilities which are important as far as young children are concerned for reading development, because if the person is metalinguistic skilled, then naturally the person will be better reader, because he or she will be able to easily correlate to the linguistic aspects as well as able to correlate to the cultural aspect, and this is prerequisite as far as the learning is concerned to read and write in a new language. So, friends, with this we try to understand what are the basic models which can be introduced as far as the bilingual education is concerned. We shall be talking about the few models which are in practice and which can be adopted by the educationist in the as a part of the policy as well as by the teacher as to improve her teaching. The first model which we need to talk about is the transitional model. The second model which we will be talking about is the maintenance model, and the third which we are talking about is enrichment model. All these models usually are divided from the point of view of the goals or the objectives which we aim to have, and this is also with respect to the educational context and the relationships of the languages. Languages means relationship of the majority as well as the minority language speakers, and the sequencing of languages is the media of instructions within the program. So, the models have to be decided apart, keeping in view all these aspects. When we talk about transitional, maintenance or the enrichment model, we have to understand that the aim is to shift the child from home to the minority language or from the minority language to the majority language, with the result of social and cultural assimilation. When this is the aim, this is at the center, then this is called transitional bilingual education. To repeat it again and to understand it further, now let us try to understand that transitional means to transit from one area to another area. That means the person speaks certain language at home, which may be the minority language or the majority language. Minority language can be Malayalam or Urdu, which is very much similar to the Hindi, and majority language can be English to the dominant, which is the majority language. And because the child is shifting from one language to another, that means the language which is spoken at home is forming the base for the child, and this will also result in social and cultural assimilation, because when the child will be shifting from Malayalam to English, this will also result in social and cultural assimilation of the cultures which he will be introduced to and the culture which he or she is already aware of, because that is being practiced at home. Another aim as far as transitional model is concerned is the fostering the minority language in the child, because that is the identity of the child, because that is the cultural identity. Here the child will be preserving the heritage language. Heritage language would be the language which is being practiced at home, and this type of bilingual education is referred as maintenance bilingual education. That means in the case of maintenance bilingual education, the aim would be that the minority language is strengthened and the other language is introduced simultaneously. So, here it is called maintenance bilingual education. To give an example, let us try to understand that we want tribal culture to be preserved. We want some tribal language to be preserved. Then which model will we adopt? Will we adopt transitional model or maintenance model? We will adopt maintenance bilingual education, because in the case of tribal language, which is the cultural identity of the child would be knowing other languages also, because it is not possible that the child who is studying in the school or in the higher education wouldn't be knowing Hindi or English. The child would be knowing either Hindi or English, but the maintenance model will be introduced so that the language which was tribal language, that is preserved as a heritage language. So, in this case the model adopted will be the maintenance language model. Friends, the first was transitional model. The example in transitional model was the kind of the model, this is the model which was adopted by USA when they tried the minority students, or we can say the socio-economic, the students from the poor socio-economic development as per USA policy, to bring them to the level of students whom they considered of the higher level because they were English speaking or they were studying various subjects in English. To bring them to that level, transitional model was adopted. Maintenance level, I gave you the example, if we want to preserve certain language, certain culture, then we will be following the maintenance model. Now, let us try to understand what is enrichment model. Enrichment model of bilingual education has many characteristics. They are common with the maintenance model because, as the word itself says, it is enrichment. That means the preservation will be there. The students will have to be taught language in such a manner that they don't give up that language. That language is also promoted, that language is also developed simultaneously. The first language is also developed and extended, because the aim, the objective of enrichment model is cultural pluralism and linguistic diversity, because this is the aim, that cultural pluralism and linguistic diversity is at the center as far as enrichment model is concerned. So, it will follow both, it will have the characteristics of both the models, that is transitional as well as maintenance model, because it will be taking one step further from the maintenance model, which aims at maintaining the first language. It will be extending it to the acquiring of second language or third language, leading to cultural pluralism and linguistic diversity. So, friends, from here on what we understand that the bilingual education can be taught from the various models depending upon the need of the policy framers, need of the curriculum. We also need to understand that what are the types of bilingual education. Friends, whenever we talk about type of bilingual education, this is something which we talked in the first lecture, that bilingual education can be addictive bilingualism when the second language is added to the mother tongue, or it can be that the type of bilingual education can also have, apart from the additive, it can also have subtractive. Subtractive means that the language which is spoken at home, that is not developed, rather the other language is more developed. So, it can be of both the types, as well as it can be of the type as we discussed in the first lecture also. It can be introduced in such a manner that a content of a subject is taught in one language and other content is taught in the other language. Similarly, we can have the one content being taught in the multiple language depending upon the understanding of the students. So, friends, bilingual education can be decided on the two bases. One is the model which we have talked about, and the types as we talked about, additive and subtractive bilingualism, that can be understood from the point of view of type of bilingual education. So, friends, with this I, Dr. Renu Tomar, take your leave, and I shall be joining you with another topic, with another area, because with this we have completed talking about bilingual education. Friends, see you soon. Thank you. Namaskar and good afternoon.